Thank you, President. And I'm very pleased that this bill has finally made it to this House. And I have to say, it was 9 months ago, almost exactly, which is a lovely coincidence, that I put the amendment up to remove the police checks from this legislation. So, as the Minister said at the time, this was going to happen and it was going to happen quickly. And 9 months later, we are seeing it happen. And I'm very pleased. I'm actually very pleased about this. And I must say, in listening to Ms Maxwell previously, my heart rate has started going. And I must say, I was feeling very troubled by this notion that the people seeking IVF would somehow be deviant and that would be out there to harm children. And having had close personal experience, as I'm sure many of us have, with the trials and tribulations of IVF, and we know how much those parents desperately want those children and how they are, in many ways they are more planned. I'm not going to say more wanted than when a natural childbirth occurs, but certainly the planning and the desire for that child is quite a different process than it is when someone is lucky enough to be able to fall pregnant naturally. Going along the path of argument that you had there, Ms Maxwell, will I not be surprised if we are looking for police checks to anyone who's pregnant? And would we then be looking at, well, I don't think it is ridiculous if we're saying that IVF, we have to be concerned about some people maybe having IVF for nefarious and desperate and disaster and terrible purposes, as you mentioned, to not suggest that you wouldn't say that would be across the board then. But I won't dwell on this because I think this is a happy moment that this legislation and this bill is finally coming to this House and is finally here to pass. We know during that Gorton review that even though the Gorton review felt that this was outside the scope of the review, they did note that this was the most mentioned issue by the clinics and by the people that were interviewed and by the stakeholders as part of that review, as part of that report and as part of that review. The fact that we would establish a presumption against treatment, I think, really was shameful. And I didn't talk about this anecdote when we were last discussing this last time, but certainly someone I'm aware of, very close that I'm aware of, did have a criminal record. Not a significant one, but had a criminal record. And the stress that caused that family waiting to see if they could have a child because of a historical past conviction was cruel. It was cruel, it was unnecessary, and I'm very pleased that no one else will have to go through this as a result of this bill. We are the only state that has had this remnant in our legislation, and I'm very pleased to see that this legislation will finally remove that presumption of guilt for someone seeking IVF, that presumption that we don't quite trust them. Unlike anyone who could have a child naturally. There we would trust them implicitly, but because they require our assistance, that there is this level of distrust in that person. And I certainly, when we were debating this last August, I spoke to many people about the pain and trauma that did cause. So I am very pleased to see this bill, some 9 months after the Reason Party first put up its amendments, coming through this House, and I very happily commend it to the House.